Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Lost Years of Merlin book stream. This is Chapter 5 of the Fires of Merlin, also known as Book 3 in the series. In the last chapter, Merlin actually got attacked by a Creelix, and they steal magical powers. So, the last we heard, it was just silence with total darkness after Merlin got attacked. So, let's find out what happened. Chapter 5, Negatus Mysterium. I awoke to find myself once again on the leaves. Something brittle and tasteless clung to my tongue. I spat it out. A twig. Someone, my mother, lifted her head from my chest, where she seemed to have been listening. Tears stained her cheeks, but her sapphire eyes shone with relief. Lightly, she stroked my brow. You have awakened at last. She looked up into the rustling boughs of the rowan tree and closed her eyes in thanks. At that instant, I glimpsed just behind her a pair of huge, bony wings. The Creelix. I rolled to the side, smacking into her full force. She cried out, tumbling down the slope like an apple dropped from a branch. With a single leap, I landed on my feet. Wobbly though I was, I positioned myself between her and the dreaded beast. Then I caught myself. The Creelix hung as limp as a discarded scarf, suspended by the branches of the rowan tree. Thick, gnarled boughs wrapped around each of its wings, while several more pinned the furred body against the trunk. Its claws, once so threatening, dangled lifelessly, while its head drooped forward, obscuring the fangs. A deep gash, stained with purple blood, across its neck. Don't worry. Carepre's hand closed on my shoulder. It's quite dead. My mother puffed up behind us. So am I, almost. I whirled around. I'm so sorry. I know what you thought. She forced a grin, even as she rubbed a tender spot on her shoulder. And I'm glad to know, beyond doubt, my son, that your strength has returned. I turned back to the Creelix, draped against the tree. How? I began, but it was... How? I do so love someone who can ask a clear question. Rhea emerged from behind the trunk, grinning sassily at me. In her hand she held my sword, gleaming in the scattered sunlight of the knoll. She lifted the scabbard from the ground, thrust in the blade, and handed them to me. I thought you'd prefer your sword without all that blood. Such a ghastly purple color. Reminds me of a rotten fish. Seeing the confusion on my face, she glanced at Carepre and Ellen. I suppose we ought to fill him in, otherwise he'll be peppering us with unfinished questions all day long. Tell me, I roared. What in the world happened to me and that flying maggot over there? Capre's head wagged. I tried to warn you. It all happened too fast. A Creelix lives on magic, you see. Eats it, sucks it right out of its prey, as a bee takes nectar from a flower. Since I, like everyone else, thought the last Creelix died centuries ago, I never bothered to tell you about them before. Foolish error. Greatest terror. A better tutor would have taught you that way, the only way to battle one, as the wizards of old learned the hard way, I'm afraid, is slyly, indirectly. The worst thing you can do is confront it head on, exposing all your magic. As I did. Buckling the sword, I shook my head. But I had no idea what hit me. There was this flash of scarlet light, then all my strength, all my life it seemed, was ripped away. Even my second sight felt crippled. The eyes beneath the bushy brows gazed at me solemnly. It could have been worse. Far worse. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt rougher than the rowan's bark. I could have died, you mean? So why didn't I, right then? His hand reached over and tapped my wrist. At first I noticed nothing. Suddenly, I spied the puncture, smooth and round, in the sleeve of my tunic. A thin ring of charcoal surrounded it. Something seemed to have melted, not ripped, right through the cloth. The fang, he declared, struck here, a finger's width to the side, and you would have died, without question, because even the tiniest contact with the fang of a Creelix will destroy the power as well as the life of any magical creature, no matter how strong or large. Pensively, he ran a hand through his mane. That is why the ancient wizards and enchantresses tried so hard to avoid face-to-face battles. especially with weapons that held their own magic, which simply gave the Krelixes more to dine upon. Like my sword here. Yes, or like the great sword Deepercut you rescued some time ago. One of the island's oldest legends tells how Deepercut was hidden, buried somewhere, for more than 100 years, just so no Krelixes could find it. He chewed on his lip. Now you see, my boy, why I didn't want you to wield your staff, for it carries, I suspect, more magic than a dozen Deepercuts. I glanced toward the magical staff lying among the leaves. How then did they fight the Krelixes if they couldn't do it face to face? That I don't know, but I can promise you this. I intend to find out. His eyes narrowed, in case there were any more left. I blanched. So how did you stop this one? He glanced gratefully at the cobbler's rowan. Thanks to your friend over there, and your talented sister. All at once I understood. Rhea, so you did it! Using tree speech. You spoke to the tree, and it snatched the Krelix from behind. She gave a nonchalant shrug. Barely in time, too. Next time you try to get yourself killed, at least give us a little warning. Despite myself, I grinned. I'll do my best. Then, as I glanced at the giant, bat-like form hanging limply from the branches, the grin disappeared. Even a tree as powerful as this one couldn't have held any creature that could fight back with magic. So why didn't the Krelix? Surely if it lived on others' magic, it must have some of its own. Magic? Carefree rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Not as we normally think of it, but it did possess something, what the ancients called negatus mysterium, that strange ability to negate or swallow up the magic of others. That was the scarlet flash, negatus mysterium being released. If directed at you, it can numb some of your magic, at least temporarily, but it won't kill you. That part is left to the fangs. He scooped up a handful of leaves, then let them drift back to the ground. Yet the Krelix's own power ended there. Leaping, changing, binding, all the skills you've been trying to develop. The beast itself couldn't command, so it had no power to strike back once caught by the tree. I indicated the corpse, or to keep you from using my sword to finish it off. No, answered Rhea, her face clouded. Before any of us could get to the sword, it used the blade on itself. Carefree nodded. Perhaps it feared us so much that it chose to slit its throat before we could. Or perhaps, he added darkly, it feared we might learn something important if it had lived. Like what? Like who has kept it alive and hidden all these years? I shot him a questioning look. The poet's face, already grave, grew more somber still. He fingered the air as if turning the pages of a book that only he could see. In ancient times, he half whispered, there were people who feared anything magical, from the merest light flyer to the most powerful wizard. They saw all magic as evil, and, too often, wizards and enchantresses would abuse their powers, justifying such fears. These people formed a society, clan righteous they called themselves, that met secretly, plotting to destroy magic wherever they found it. They wore an emblem, concealed most of the time, of a fist crushing a lightning bolt. He drove his own fist into his palm. Eventually, they started to breed the Krelixes, beasts as unnatural as their appetites, and to train them, as well, to attack enchanted creatures without warning, to wipe out any magical powers completely. Even if the Krelixes themselves died in the process, their victims would usually also die. Soulfully, he gazed at me. Their favorite targets, I'm afraid, were young enchanters like you, the ones whose powers were just only ripening. A Krelix would be assigned to watch each of them, to stay hidden until the very moment those powers began to emerge. It might have been the youth's first changing, first triumph in battle, or first musical instrument. At that moment, the beast would sweep down from the sky, hoping to prevent the young wizard or enchantress from ever growing up. Seeing Ellen's morose expression, he grimaced. This, truly, is Finkyra's darkest day. I cringed, as if the shadow of the Krelix had passed over me again. I knew now that whoever had sent it had done so for one particular purpose, to destroy me, to keep me from using whatever powers I possessed. Or, was such a thing possible, to keep me from ever facing Valdirg. Okay, my friends, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the reading, and I hope you join me again for tomorrow for chapter 6 called Two Halves of Time. Alrighty. Have a wonderful night. Bye.